Welcome to Library. Welcome to the second link in Library's hopefully infinite book chain, in which one speaker hands on to another. This is the second link. The first link, if you were here a few weeks ago, was Idris Elba, and our guest this evening was nominated by Idris, and our guest this evening will, in her turn, nominate the next guest. She is Oona King, Baroness King of Bow?
Oh, whatever you want to say. I thought that sounded better than Baroness King of Mile-End, innit?
What's wrong with Mile-End, please?
Nothing is where I live.
You describe yourself as a writer and a broadcaster and a campaigner, but really you are a politician. And if Wikipedia is to be believed, you always wanted to be a politician. You were at school in Camden with the Miliband brothers, and Wikipedia claims that you went to see your careers teacher and told the teacher that your ambition was to be Prime Minister. And the teacher said, why didn't you think about being a librarian instead?
That is absolutely true. I wouldn't want to say that everything else in Wikipedia is true. I also read, I think it was in Wikipedia, that I was brought up in Hungary, which is not true. I was brought up in Camden. And there's amazing things you can read about yourself in Wikipedia, but that story is absolutely true.
I'm relieved to hear it. You worked for the GMB trade union, and then you were elected to Parliament as Labour MP for Bethnal Green in Bow in 1997. You held it until 2005, when George Galloway took it away from you in a notably dirty election, in which I think your support for the invasion of Iraq was counted against you from the point of view of many of your constituents. Have the wounds of that healed?
You end up in politics sometimes in a place where you can't quite work out how that happened. For me, in 1998, I went to Rwanda, and I visited genocide sites, and I couldn't get over the fact that there was another war in Africa starting next to Rwanda, the Congo, where genocide was happening. 6 million people had died, and it just wasn't in the news. So I set up the British Parliament's first and only group at the time on genocide prevention. And then all the Iraqi Kurds got in touch with me and said, oh, if you're really interested in genocide, here's a genocide going on in Iraq. And this is the only living leader who is committing genocide against his people. Will you stand with us and fight Saddam Hussein against Saddam Hussein? I was like, yeah, of course. And then from that point, everything else followed. Because it's very hard when you've worked with a group of people over a period of years. And this was before, George Bush was even elected. This was before 9/11 had happened. This is another universe. And when someone says, are you going to, really fight forcefully with us and make speeches in Parliament, calling for the downfall of Saddam Hussein, which I did, and they are on the record, and that was the position I held. And then you find yourself with George W. Bush, which was what George Galloway, quite rightly, I would have done the same if I was in his position, said every minute of every day. Oh, if you vote for Oona King, you're voting for George W. Bush. It's Oona and George W. Bush in a war against Islam.
Because many people thought...
and that was really...
Many people thought Galloway wasn't fighting clean. You would have done the same?
Wasn't. No, sorry, what I'm saying is, if I could have linked any enemy to George W. Bush, possibly, both the most stupid and culpable man alive in politics, I would do it. And that's what George Galloway did. I mean, he did other things. He told, because I'm Jewish, and he told everyone that I wanted to ban halal meat. So that's, and I was trying to explain that if you think I do that because I'm Jewish, well, kosher. Do you understand the concept of kosher, halal? Same difference. You'd have to end up banning kosher. That didn't matter. They told people that I spent my parliamentary salary on paying the Israeli army to bomb Palestinian children. And that's what you're up against. That's literally what people would tell me why they couldn't vote for me. Oh, you've been a great constituency MP, but we don't like the fact that you're spending your salary to bomb Palestinian children. I mean, it's just incredible. It's very hard to fight against that when it gets into a realm of fantasy, really. There's a question there. Your question was, basically, do you move on from that? I don't think the world will ever move on for a long time from Iraq. We're seeing how it plays out every day. So, and I think it's a bit self-absorbed for me to consider my own situation in that. It's not really relevant, you know. Me losing my job, what I mean is, how can I go, oh, that wasn't very nice.
You got another one pretty quickly as head of diversity at Channel 4. Then you became a peer, Baroness King of Bow, as we say. You still work for Channel 4 part-time on diversity. You have been a front bench spokesman in the Lords, and you have, and this may become relevant later, you have 3 adopted children with your husband, and 2.5 years ago your biological son was born of a surrogate mother. Now, we have asked you to talk about 3 books, one which you've read in the past and admired, one which you're currently reading, and one that you would recommend others to read. And as I said, we're going to ask you to nominate somebody else. So, Oona King, may we have, please, your first book?
The book I think that I remember most, that impacted me at the time, is Vanity Fair by Thackeray. And yeah, it really struck me. It's the first time, I mean, call me a bit dim maybe, but it's the first time I read a so-called classic and just thought, wow, people haven't really changed, it's just the decades that have gone by. And for someone interested in politics, it's all about that manipulation, albeit on a different social scale. Oh, as I talk about it, I'm sounding omnipotent and powerful.
Is that going to happen to both of us?
I hope so.
Oh, carry on. Don't stop.
Well, I mean, you know, it's amazing. If you want to read a book that really strips away social artifice and at the same time shows you how someone can go about faking it, I mean, you know, that's the original masterpiece.
Let's boil those 900 pages down to something very, very simple for those who haven't read it. It's the story of 2 women in the very early 19th century in England, one of whom is lovely, a good person and fundamentally stupid, and the other of whom
and
rich, at least to begin with, and the other is extremely clever, utterly unscrupulous, and has no money, and must make her way in the world through her own wits, and that's Becky Sharp. I suppose lots of people who read Vanity Fair remember Becky Sharp. Did you identify her with her in any way?
I wouldn't say that I identified with her. I was always wanting to be empathetic towards a woman who had nothing to fall back on except herself. And also in those days, it's just that idea of women having absolutely no way forward other than through a husband or a relative that's going to give them something. You know, that closed shop, basically, of privilege, and how to, you know, when you don't have those universal those universal goods that allow us to do it through education and healthcare and a safety net, those things did not exist for women then.
And the prospect of employment.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Just being dependent, and so she's not willing to settle for that. Obviously, she's, as you described, she's completely unscrupulous, and that's what's really interesting. That's what I love about the book. The subtitle of it is a novel about a hero, isn't it? Because that's essentially what this book sets up. Is everyone's flawed. You know, you've got poor girl fighting against the odds, clever, deserves to do better, you want to sympathise with her, but then she's a complete bloody cow. You know, and then you've got the good, lovely girl, she's well off, and in fact at the end you realise actually she's just quite vacuous. So, you know, no one comes out of it smelling of roses, and so it's I think it's like considered maybe to be the first super realistic book of its time. There's no Hollywood ending, even though obviously Hollywood didn't exist then, but I like that as well. I like it because, you know, in life it just doesn't all work out on the night.
I asked whether you identified with her, not because she's unscrupulous.
Because I'm a scheming politician.
I thought about asking that, and then I thought, no, that would be rude. But she is an outsider. She is, because she doesn't have money, and because her dad was a very poor and drunken artist, and her mother was apparently a French dancer, she's completely unacceptable in society. She has to marry a well-born man in order to stand the remotest chance of getting accepted. I wonder to what extent you, growing up, felt an outsider, and whether there was any kind of fellow feeling there.
I was at primary school until 1979, and then secondary school basically the 80s. You know, I mean, okay, I'm 48, I say it doesn't seem that long ago. Is it that long ago? It's quite a long time ago. But it's still strange to me that, you know, in my class in North London, in a normal, comprehensive secondary school and a normal, you know, non-selective, non-private primary school, I was the only mixed-race person I knew. And that's really strange. It's like they all appeared, so I'm looking up, there's loads there. Everywhere you look, they're everywhere. It's like, where were they in my childhood? It's strange. And so, you know, there was a very clear race matrix. And my best friends are still some of those white kids, especially my girlfriends. And they will, I wrote about it in my diaries of being an MP actually, and that was the fact they read it and they were like, there was a race matrix in North London? What do you mean? And I was like, well yeah, come on, we all knew that, you know, the kids at the white kids were at the top, and then you had the Afro-Caribbean kids, because they were quite cool and hard, they were next, and then you had the African kids, and then you had the Asian kids. And that was how it was. And, you know, just don't anyone tell me that it wasn't, because that absolutely, every child of colour in my class knew that that was how it worked, in terms of a ranking, in terms of a hierarchy. And that's just how it was. But as I say...
Where did you fit into that, as a mixed-race child, black father, Jewish mother?
Well, see, it's weird, because, I mean, I think I was definitely below the Afro-Caribbeans and just above the Asians. That's how bad it is, man. I'm being truthful, because, and I have quite an Asian outlook in some senses. I mean, I'm always very, very keen. You know, all the women here, when you walk into a room and there's no other woman, you notice that. Black people, when you walk into a room and there's no other black... white men, maybe, where do you walk where there are no other white men? I don't know, wherever it might be, you notice it. But the point is, I notice all the time. I switch on TV these days, I see people of African descent everywhere. I don't see very many Asian, not as many. You know, anyway, that's not really the point, but yeah, if you're asking me where I was, I feel badly that the Asian kids definitely got the worst deal and the hardest time, and then I was bobbing along somewhere between the Africans and the Afro-Caribbeans, in that middle. I mean, you know, you were always a mongrel, you were always being called names, like, you know, like all kids actually, just it was on a race basis, and I did, because there was no one else like me, like quite literally, I remember the first time I saw people quote-unquote like me, and I must have been about 12 or 13, and it was seeing Nene Cherry and Sade. When they got famous, I was like, oh my God, and I just hadn't seen it before, and so I knew I was special though, because my white mum was hilarious. She would say, now we've got to stick together, us blacks. And she's like one of those white people. She's so white she glows in the dark. Do you know what I mean? She's blonde. I mean, I'm a blonde black person, obviously. But, and so she would do everything she could to try and make me feel that it was okay that I was different and that my difference was special, not bad. But when I got into the school playground, it didn't matter what she told me at home, I knew it wasn't a good thing.
Is that what made you become what you are today, which is essentially someone whose life revolves around campaigning on diversity in the media, principally in television, but more generally? I mean, that experience informs your life today still?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, you know, one of the books we're going to discuss explains how everyone's experience informs their life. And so, yeah, that feeling of just, you're going to be excluded from things, for an unfair reason. You know, kids have quite a keen sense of social justice, and yes, I did feel that. The point about the work I do at the moment in terms of the media is just, I feel so strongly that we need a media which is essentially our culture. You know, it's about who we are as a nation, that is accessible and that isn't a closed shop, that is diverse, that is vibrant, that's the best of Britain. And that's what Britain is at its best. There are few other countries, I think personally no other country, that can rival us for an intelligent approach to diversity. Now, it doesn't always feel that way, I know, but having lived in Brussels, lived in Paris, lived in America, man, as a black person growing up, I would rather be here than a lot of those other places.
It's a very cynical book about all sorts of things, and one of the things that's profoundly cynical about is politicians and politics. There are several politicians in it. They're either venal or stupid or unbelievably dull. It didn't put you off politics?
I found it extraordinarily honest. You know, it seems to have depicted a society in a very honest way, and the point about that society was that nothing was more important than appearances. Appearances were everything, and that is a problem with politics. It's too much, although it's for the 21st century, not a few centuries back. It's still that, it's about appearances, which is a vanity, isn't it? You know, it's avoiding, too often we avoid the truth and the substance of matters, and we're bothering with the froth on top. And to me, Vanity Fair is the first book I read that explained to me how a culture can be like that and how damaging it is for everyone involved.
Why do contemporary politicians do that? Why do they concentrate on the froth?
Because I think often you find as a politician that when you tell the absolute unvarnished truth, you often get your head chopped off for it. And also, because politics is war by other means, words are weapons, and they are taken down and they are used against you. So you're always trying to avoid a hostage to fortune, but that means that you're spinning. You end up spinning, you know, I mean, but everybody does it. I mean, hey, I work in the media. Hello. You know, everybody does it. Individuals do it, corporations do it, politicians do it, countries do it. Everybody does it. I don't like it.
The Labour Party is now led by a man who I suspect got elected partly because he was perceived as not doing that.
Absolutely, yeah, he was. And then you see what happens when you don't do it.
How long do you give him?
I have no idea, really, I have no idea. I mean, you know, I personally hope that Britain doesn't have a Conservative government for a day longer than we have to. And so I wish him well, but I do think that until, you know, it has to be the message and the messenger. I don't think you can have just one or the other.
And which is wrong in the case of Jeremy Corbyn as leader of the Labour Party?
Oh, some would say both, some would say neither. I mean...
Which would you say?
I would say that until you get permission, you know, the British people have to give you permission so that they listen. And he hasn't had the permission yet to be able to lay out what he wants to lay out. And having said that, Ed Miliband laid it out, I think, quite coherently, quite, if you're talking about the policy, and yet people weren't that interested in the policy. They wanted to judge how he ate a bacon sandwich or whatever else it was. And so I'm just saying that if Ed Miliband couldn't pull that off, you know, it makes you wonder how well Jeremy will manage amongst all the spin.
The one you're reading at the moment is also about politics.
It is about politics, yeah. It's Bringing Up the Bodies by Hilary Mantel. And so it's King Henry VIII. I learned a lot of things in my school playground, but and in my school, but history and history of kings and queens was not one of those things I learned. So
even though you did a history A?
Yeah, I did history A. I got through an entire history A level and did not do a single king or queen. So you know, I mean, I think we go too far, don't we, in extremes. So in the past, I think it was only Kings and Queens. And then when I was doing it, 1986, 1987, History A-level, not a single kid. I can tell you about trepanning, history of medicine. That's what I veered off to. So anyway, I know nothing about this period of King Henry VIII, and I think what Hilary Mantel has done is basically the most awesome feat of literary magic, because she's basically created like a 3D environment. So you read that book and it's like virtual reality. Suddenly you're like, oh, that's what was happening with King Henry VIII and his 8 wives and all the rest of it. It's just an extraordinary feat. I can't actually comprehend how she did it. I genuinely don't understand that extraordinary level of intelligence and empathy, you know, entwined to bring something to life to the point, like I say, that I feel it's almost like a hologram in front of you. It's spectacular.
It's the sequel to Hilary Mantel's Wolf Hall. It's the second in a planned 3 books about Thomas Cromwell, not Oliver, Thomas Cromwell, Henry's great minister. It's all told from Cromwell's perspective. The interesting thing about it is that if I'm a fan too, I read Wolf Hall and I thought Cromwell was an extraordinary creation, and also Mantel's Cromwell was an admirable man in many ways. He achieved a lot. He wasn't gentle, but you felt that he was in some ways a good man. He had many admirable qualities. What happens in this book is...
I haven't got to the end of it, so don't ruin it for me.
Okay, but you've got far enough to know that he is involved in a plot to...
Oh, I've heard.
And you don't know what happened to Anne Boleyn.
We know the what, but not the how, okay?
Exactly. This is the how.
The how.
Do you find that portrait of a man who was in some ways driven by circumstances as a politician, as a servant of his king, pursuing a particular policy, to do things which are, I mean, by anybody's standards, extremely reprehensible? Do you find that convincing?
Just the bit when Henry VIII starts to fancy the woman who will become his 3rd wife, so is just the bit when he's going, oh God, why did I marry Anne Boleyn in the first place? What sorcery tricked me into, you know, disestablishing the church and all that? Cromwell hasn't yet done that, and what I think is amazing is he's basically, okay, probably he's not, but as far as I can go, he's the first genuinely self-made man in British history that we seem to know about in that detail, who comes to run the country. In other words, he does, you know, it's a bit like Becky Sharp in Vanity Fair. He comes from, he's a blacksmith's son who is beaten to a pulp by his very violent, drunk father. He has no prospects whatsoever, and yet he rises to rule England. Well, I was just like, no way. Did he? That's amazing. And I'm still surprised by that. And so what he's dealing with, when I read it, it's funny, it's like, oh, that's what it's like for black people, because he is just looked down on, just by virtue of who he is, he's looked down on all the time. And he, yeah, like you say, he comes across, and I don't know how much of it is fiction and how much of it isn't. I mean, it's a fictitious take on real events. But by her account, he's an amazing man. I mean, he's, you know, taking beggars in off the street, he's allowing women to get an education, he's dealing with the death of his wife and 2 daughters, and he's running the country, and he's trying to stop Henry being a complete psychopath on occasions. So I'm giving him the thumbs up.
You may revise that view slightly.
Yeah, I know.
By the time you get to the end of the book.
When I see
Will anyone who's read the book agree with me in that? Yes, right, good, okay.
No,
You've got a very interesting experience coming up. The 3rd book is one that we've asked you to recommend to somebody else to read. So what is it and why? I've got a copy here.
So this book I recommend to anyone to read. It's called Why Love Matters, and if you ever wonder about why people are how they are, or what influences people to behave the way they do, or how we treat our kids, or how to parent, or just how to be a decent citizen. That book has extraordinary findings in it, which are all based in neuroscience, essentially, and the study of the brain, on how the impact of the first 18 months of life is disproportionately long on the rest of your life. You know, the way your brain develops, certainly in the first 2 years, will shape how you think and the personality that you have. So I think any thinking person is probably interested in the argument around nature-nurture. You know, we've had that argument, nature-nurture. Certainly I was brought up thinking I would tend towards nurture, because otherwise what's the point? It's all just predetermined. And what this book explained to me is that it's not nature or nurture, it is precisely the interplay of the two when placed. You know, it is how genes react. They will react differently depending on the environment.
A baby's brain actually develops physically in ways that respond in the earliest months of life to the way it's treated by, basically by its parents and by its mother in particular, so that your physical and thus your physical development and thus the development of your personality and your mind are absolutely dependent on what happens in those first few months. Now, you're the mother of 3 adopted children who came to you at ages of 5 months to 13 months, and you've got 1 natural child. Do you see, this is a very personal and direct question, but do you see in the your adopted children evidence that they didn't enjoy that very close relationship with their mother?
Well, in fact, all 3 adoptions were taken away from their birth mothers at birth. So it wasn't that they lost a close personal relationship, because they were placed with foster carers who were good foster carers, but they had already suffered the damage. I mean, certainly the 2 older ones, both their birth mothers were drug addicts. So, you know, my oldest son was born with heroin and crack cocaine addictions. That's what he had to deal with in the first 10 days of life, coming off, you know, withdrawal and that sort of thing. So it's not that they didn't have that close connection with their foster parents, but then again, they had the close connection and then they had it ripped away because we turn up, adopt them, go, hooray, happiest day of our life is the worst day of their life. Every adoption is different. You know, the kids that stay in abusive scenarios, that's the very worst situation, and my kids are lucky, therefore, that they weren't in that very worst situation. It depends, the interplay of having a very stressed birth mother, the levels of cortisol that the child is exposed to in the womb, which is what she explains very clearly there, how it impacts your ability really to regulate emotions. And it's definitely the case that I can see, you know, my older kids struggling with that. There's also then issues around attachment, which come because they were removed at 13 months. Anyone who's, you know, brought up a child will understand that by 13 months that child knows who you are, where they are when they're in the home, and if you just disappear, that's a devastating impact it has on them. But the point is about this book is not that we sort of hang our heads in despair and say, oh, okay, if these kids are abused or exposed to traumatic experiences or have no love and affection before the age of 2 years, that can never be rectified. It can, it's just the same way that, you know, a man with no legs can still run 100 metres faster than you or I. It's just, it's far, far, far harder. And so why as a society wouldn't we do everything we can to make sure that kids in those first 2 years have that investment in their development? Because all the other things that happen after that, and especially for kids in the care system, you know, it's kids just being shunted straight from a dysfunctional childhood into an institution, into jail, into a life of criminality, and it's horrifying. And you know, we really, as a society, we really need to grapple with it. And that book makes you realise just how urgent it is.
For people bringing up their own children, a reminder of what is good practice, why you should follow it. But what are the implications, if any, of the book? What are the suggestions the book might make for what politicians should do? Because we're all familiar with that negative cycle that you just described of people who grow up in dysfunctional families, taken into account, so on and so forth, and then have children of their own who exhibit the same problems. How do you break that? What can society at large do?
Where are we investing our money? I mean, so for instance, and I say this as someone whose dad teaches in the university sector, but we spend more money per student in the university sector, i.e. after 18 years of age, than we do on a child under 2 years of age. So the most obvious policy implication for me as a politician is, are we putting our resources where we should? Now, I wouldn't for a second advocate taking a penny out of higher education, but I would advocate taking it out of other areas. If we think education is worth investing in, which obviously we do, then actually invest in a child being able to learn. Because what kids learn at that age is how to interact, how to learn.
Doesn't that mean getting involved with the family?
We wait until, you know, what happened to the birth, my kids' birth mothers. Don't wait until they have their kids taken away at birth and are given to someone like me. Yeah, that's great for me. It's terrible for those families and for those women in particular. You know, women are not getting the support they need, especially women that are repeatedly getting pregnant. They're in abusive relationships. They're in, they've been given a drug problem, quite often turned into drug addicts because it suits their pimps or in some cases their parents. I mean, the horror stories that I have, you know, been made very acutely aware of because of my kids, you wouldn't believe it was possible, really, what is happening out there on the ground, and it is happening. And so that's the extreme version of it, but what this book is about, we all know people who had very affluent childhoods but are still a walking emotional car wreck, and that's because their parents didn't take account of that either. So it's good for everyone, not just those who really are Britain's most vulnerable kids.
Okay, anybody want to ask a question of Oona, make a point, to pick up on anything that we've said? Yes, lady or gentleman, sorry,
Lady.
got the wrong glasses on. Lady, yes.
I've always admired your career and you're someone I actually look up to. One of the questions I have for you, you've worn many hats throughout the years. You're a politician, a broadcaster, a mother, a wife. How do you manage to juggle all of these and do well at them?
Do you know, I get asked this question a lot, and the main answer is, I don't manage. I don't really. I just left my 2-year-old with like small Lego pieces that clearly say it's a choking hazard. I was like, gotta go! So I don't, especially when I kind of managed a bit when I had 2 kids, but with 3, nah, and now 4, oh my God, it's shocking. The things I do is shocking, because you just can't. And but the main thing, the thing that upsets me most about being a working parent is you just have to go into situations where you know the people you're up against have had like maybe tenfold the amount of time that you've had. It's the time deficit, that if I want to get anything done, I literally have to do it in the middle of the night. That is when I get stuff done. It is the only time I get stuff done. Especially because my kids, I get them to bed at 10 p.m. I've usually been up since 5:30 and I'm shattered. So I'll fall asleep at 10:30, and if there's something that I know I haven't done, I wake up going, I didn't do it, I haven't done it. And I do it at 3 o'clock in the morning, and it's pretty rubbish. And you just have to come to terms with mediocrity. That's what I do. That's what I've done. That's how I manage.
With the careers, how have you managed to kind of be a politician, be a broadcaster, and still manage to do both of those things well as well? Because I'm aspiring to do similar things, and I want to know, how do you manage to do all of those things well?
Well, I was really lucky. Having the job that I have, I was appointed head of diversity for Channel 4 in 2009. It was luck. And so in other words, a headhunter rang me up, and I actually had my dream job at that time, and my dream job was I was the Prime Minister's assistant. And I was like, oh, enough of being a bloody crap backbench MP. Yes, I will be the Prime Minister's assistant, senior policy advisor. And suddenly all these MPs that hadn't given me the time of day, they were oh my God, on their knees to me. My personality isn't particularly, bent towards megalomania, but it was quite a nice situation. And so this headhunter rang me up and said, there's this job at Channel 4 and I just think you'd be really good for it, and will you think about it? I was like, no, I'm the Prime Minister's senior policy advisor. Why do I want to go and be the head of diversity at Channel 4? She was like, well, for this, that and the other reason, just think about it. I was like, no thanks, but no thanks. Anyway, she did this black woman thing, because she was a black woman, and she just rang me up again and again. She was like, I'm a black woman, you're a black woman, you have to speak to me more. And it's a racist thing to say, but if it had been a white headhunter, I'd have been just like, you know what, I said no, just please. But she played the race card. I'm telling you the God's honest truth. She was like, come, you haven't thought about this carefully enough, come and discuss it. Anyway, long story short, I went into Channel 4 and I kind of fell in love with it. I mean, it is an amazing place. And also, Downing Street at that point had basically become, it was worse than Wolf Hall. It was psychotic. And I thought, oh my God, people, they do normal things here. Like, they leave their desk at 6 p.m. and people don't, put poison in their drink and try and, spin them out of all recognition and to beat them to death in the press. It just seemed like an incredible opportunity. And I've loved it. It has been possible for me. I'm very lucky being in the House of Lords. It means you can do two things, and that again was luck. I'm a terrible career strategist. When I was offered the House of Lords the first time down, I turned it down. I was just like, why would I want to go there? I was like, and that title, can I get rid of it? Am I stuck with it for life? That's not my style, And so it was only the second time that I was offered it, and even then I said no. They gave me 3 weeks, and it was the last night. I thought, why do I keep saying no? Just go and see, discover. I like discovering new things. Anyway, so what I'm saying is I didn't have a master plan, and that's not good. These days I do, and I do suggest that everyone else does too.
You're part-time at Channel 4, and the House of Lords is a part-time commitment.
Every now and then they keep us there quite late, but on the whole they don't. It's not like being an MP. Being an MP was hell on earth, and I couldn't really go back to that with 4 young kids. The House of Lords allows you to input into legislative decision making, but not give up your entire life, which is what I did when I was an MP.
Anybody else? Yeah.
Just wondering, your children are at school age. Just wondering if all these years later, whether or not that matrix has shifted, has gone, changed?
Yeah, that matrix has completely shifted. My kids are, my oldest is 10, so he goes to secondary school in September, and I'm very aware, everyone knows that secondary school is like a whole different ballpark, but primary school, yeah, when you do adoption, for instance, they make you think about and articulate how will you help your child deal with racism in the playground. But the racism, my child, the most bullying he got, he's a mixed race kid with a huge afro. Actually, he does get bullied for his hair. He does get bullied for his hair a bit, it has to be said. But he gets bullied more for wearing glasses. And it's a whole different matrix because there is only one white child in his class. We live in Tower Hamlets. It's the 95% of the kids are Muslim. It's just a whole different thing. The reason the kids have to be spoken to there is because they're, calling someone a white monkey is like, oh, that's not in my toolkit of how to deal with white racism, do you know what I mean? Racism towards the white child in the class. So it's very strange. And I'm not saying it will be like that at secondary school, but this far in, 10 years, it's not, he doesn't get any hassle for being mixed race or black, apart from his hair. Which I guess is a big thing, black people can't ever say apart from your hair, I know that. But it's not, it's definitely, he doesn't have the same sort of stuff that I had, just doesn't. And he grows up under a black president.
Okay, thank you very much to Oona King, that was fascinating. Thank you for the choice of very interesting books. you have to nominate somebody else, and then you have to. The clever bit is you have to ring them up and persuade them to do this, it's a really clever approach to guest booking.
I'm going to ask Jon Snow, who presents, Channel 4 News, because Jon Snow is an incredible person who I know will have far more literary insights to share with everyone, and he knows what happened, with King Henry VIII and all that stuff. He's got it absolutely down pat, so I think he would be a great guest for here.
Great. Thank you very much indeed, Oona King.
Thanks, guys.